Halo has been around for 21 years, and over those just over 2 decades, we've been consistently lied to in regards to its narrative and gameplay. Okay, lied to is probably a little bit harsh of a conclusion, but you'll understand what I'm getting at in a minute. And since quite literally day one, there has been a single narrative that's been being pushed, and that is that humanity is at war with aliens. And not just a single alien species, a conglomerate of alien species all united under a single religious hegemony, where they worship other, older aliens as gods. The member races of the Covenant, and indeed the member races of the Banished, vary so wildly from species to species, as should be expected for a group of alien species united together under a common cause. And yet, in spite of this huge variance in their origins,
and desecrated with their filthy footsteps,
noble hierarchs,
they all speak in a human tongue. They all speak English. Unless you play the games of different countries of origin, in which case, they'll speak whatever language that is for that country of origin. But you get what I'm saying. The point is, they're a group of aliens that all speak English. There's something wrong here. Now, the member species of the Covenant and the Banished haven't always spoken English. In fact, in the very first game, Halo CE, back in 2001, the elites spoke this. The jackals spoke like this. The hunters spoke like this. And the grunts spoke like this. Okay, fair enough, yeah, they spoke English, but the fact remains all the other species spoke their own language. And yes, I will acknowledge that by definition, for example, the elites spoke what effectively most OG Halo players call elite speak, not to be confused with leet speak, which is just human English in reverse, but we're stepping away from the real world kind of aspects of the game development here and actually looking at the lore behind it. So while I accept that, the elite saying wart, wart, wart was actually just Johnson saying go, go, go in reverse. Again, that's real world, we're looking at the lore, so yep. So back in Halo CE 2001, the Covenant species spoke their own language, with the exception of the grunts. Yet, Halo 2 rolls around and quite literally, the first cutscene, we get this.
There was only one chip.
One? Are you sure?
Yes. They called it the Pillar of Autumn.
I mean, literally no waiting around here. First cutscene, they're all speaking English. Halo 3 rocks around.
Let him know.
All of you vermin, cowering in the dirt, thinking what, I wonder?
They're all speaking English. Halo ODST rolls around.
Hold the creature still! Place the charge before...
They're all speaking English. Halo Reach rocks around. They're all... Wait.
I said back off, you nasty son of a bitch!
They're back to speaking their own language. Interesting. Halo 4 rocks around. They're still speaking their own language. There's hope for this franchise yet. Oh no, wait, cancel that. Halo 5 messed it up.
The envoy are resisting. Throw the envoy out the airlock.
And Halo Infinite, why have you got to do us dirty like this? I mean, not only are they speaking English...
My name is Atriox.
But an entirely new faction found on Zeta Halo that had been stored there for 100,000 years that no one has ever seen or known about, including most of the Forerunners.
Forerunners' lies are at an end.
And they speak English too! I mean, seriously, we're dealing with alien species here. Alien species will speak their own language, so I don't understand how the hell you can... Okay, let's scale this back a little bit. I think we're getting a little bit overheated here, and there's actually kind of a lore explanation for most of this. So, let's get into the lore. Now, do you notice that in Halo CE they speak their own language? Now, that was circa 2552. So that's right near the end of the Human Covenant War, but it's also the first major game. And then they suddenly lapse into speaking English for Halos 2, 3, ODST, but yet Reach, they go back to speaking their own language. Now, Reach is actually technically a prequel to Halo CE, because at the very end of Halo Reach, the Pillar of Autumn jumps away from the planet Reach and arrives at Installation 04 for Halo CE to begin. So, if you look at chronologically for the timelines, Halo CE and Halo Reach, both having the Covenant species speaking their own language, means that chronologically they were speaking their own language right up until the end of Halo CE. Then something happened somewhere between Halo CE and Halo 2, which meant that they then spoke English from Halo 2, 3, ODST, 4, 5, and Infinite. So, what happened? Well, would it come as any surprise whatsoever if I told you that Cortana happened? During their time on Installation 04, Cortana was with the Master Chief while he moved across the surface of the Halo, including going into the Covenant ship, the Truth and Reconciliation, on 2 occasions. Indeed, even after the events of Halo CE took place, at the interim between Halo CE and Halo 2, there was actually an entire span of situations that took place that led the Master Chief back to Earth that was covered in the book Halo First Strike, which involved Cortana going with Chief to a Covenant ship, venting it completely and getting rid of all of the enemies, and then actually installing herself into the systems of the ship to take over control. That ship was then piloted back to Reach to avoid contravention of the Cole Protocol, because Reach had already been discovered by the Covenant, and then eventually led them to the Unyielding Hierophant, a Covenant space station, where Cortana once again interfaced with these systems. Now, while aboard the Truth and Reconciliation, she actually came in contact with a Covenant AI, which she very quickly disseminated, broke down into pieces, and then used aspects of the code for her own uses thereafter. And as one of the most powerful and sophisticated AIs that humanity has ever brought to bear, you can bet that on any other occasion that Cortana was interfaced with Covenant or Foreigner systems, she was absorbing as much data as humanly possible to reverse engineer it to give humanity an edge. In fact, it's on record that one such incident of this actually backfired entirely. Do you remember this scene?
All Vector 2 heavies for star side intercept.
Bam! Slip space rupture off the target's bow. It's going to jump inside the city.
Or indeed this scene.
Commander, this is only Recon 111. The cruiser's above. They found...
Say again, Recon? You're breaking up.
Yet they were both Cortana's fault. Now, you've got to bear in mind that every single UNSC colony is surrounded by orbital defense platforms. They are some of the biggest, most powerful guns the UNSC has ever created, and can punch holes clean through Covenant capital ships whether they're shielded or not. Luckily for humanity, the Covenant never really mastered the art of a slipspace jump from space to in-atmosphere and vice versa. The gravity well of the planet played havoc with the calculations. So that forced every Covenant fleet that ever took down a colony to front up against the orbital defense platforms directly, overwhelming them with just sheer number but still taking heavy losses. That's why the Covenant sent ground forces to the surface of the planet Reach to take the generators offline so they didn't have to deal with the orbital defense platforms around the planet. That's how high of a threat these guns are to the Covenant, that they'll actually pit huge numbers of forces to take down the generators that power these things. So you can understand then how bad of a situation it could be if the Covenant figured out how to jump from space to in-atmosphere underneath the firing range of the orbital defense platforms, completely bypassing that first line of defense for a colony entirely. That would be a pretty bad situation, but luckily, the Covenant never figured it out. The problem is that Cortana did figure it out while she was piloting the Ascendant Justice in the upper atmosphere of Planet Threshold, just next door effectively to where Installation 04 used to be before the Master Chief blew it up. She achieved a slip-space transition while in atmosphere. And unfortunately, the AI that she thought that she'd imprisoned sent those calculations via a burst transmission to the rest of the Covenant fleet, also informing them that the Ascendant Justice, the flagship of the fleet, had been taken over. Meaning that the Covenant now had the tools and the means and know-how to completely bypass the point defense, orbital defense platforms of every human colony from that point onwards. Thanks, Cortana. But I've got off track again here. So, nevertheless, Cortana, whenever she's interfaced with any systems, Covenant or Forerunner, or indeed human, she's looking for information and she's doing everything she can to give humanity the edge. Well, while not explicitly stated, it's heavily implied that one such aspect that Cortana helped with advancing humanity's position against the Covenant was translating the various languages of the Covenant member species, so that not only is it easier to understand what's going on the battlefield when your enemies are shouting orders to each other, you could actually understand it, but also being able to hack into battle nets and communications going between ships and fleets and be able to understand what's going on there too. It's one thing to be able to hack in and just get general idea on data and origin points and waymarkers and this, that and the other, but actually being able to understand the context of the conversation, that's pretty bloody important when you're going up against an enemy. So during that interim between Halo CE and Halo 2, Cortana gained the information necessary to give the UNSC translations of the Covenant language, which were then installed into practically every standard issue helmet communication system that the UNSC had as a basic software or BIOS update. And what does that translation software do? It listens to language and speech that's going on around it, and it translates it into the native tongue of the person wearing the helmet, or in this case, English. So every single time that you have ever heard any enemy on the battlefield in Halo since Halo 2 speaking in English, it has in fact been the UNSC's version of Google Translate. It's listening to the conversation going on around it, translating it to English, and then playing that English translation back to you over your helmet speakers in a voice roughly approximating the tone of the individual speaking it, which means anytime you've ever heard any member of the Covenant speak, it actually hasn't been their voice. It's been a synthesized artificial voice speaking to you in English, while they're still speaking in their own native tongue. So chronologically that makes sense for Halo Reach and Halo CE to have their own language, and then Halo 2, 3, ODST to have English speaking translations. That's what's effectively been happening. So what happened in Halo 4? Well, these were Covenant splinter factions. These were actually a different phenotype of some of the member species of the Covenant that spoke their own unique language that hadn't been translated yet. And obviously at the end of Halo 4, Cortana in her original form dies. So there was no one around to translate that speech, and yet in Halo 5 they're back to speaking English again. But that's more than likely because of the alliance between humanity and the Swords of Sanghelios, offering up those translations of the languages from one to the other. And this also doesn't discount the fact that there are individuals across the different member species of the Covenant and the Banished who are capable of speaking English. The Arbiter is one such individual who is capable of speaking English. Avumed Telkam could also speak English, so could Jul Umdama. But of course their biology, their natural physiology of their mouths, and the fact that they have mandibles and they can't purse their lips to create P sounds, for example, means that saying words like progress or Phillips, for example, is extraordinarily difficult for them to actually enunciate. That's why it's immensely impressive when Jul Umdama says,
I keep telling you people I don't speak Sangheili.
Progress.
No, it's not so much the word progress, it's more the word rogress. But this isn't even a shadow on Thel Vadam, the Arbiter, whose grasp of the English language is near perfect. You'll also notice that Jaeger Erdomnai, when he speaks to the Master Chief at the end of Halo Infinite, says,
Say goodbye.
Look out, Chief. He looks...
Again, he doesn't exactly perfectly enunciate the word goodbye, because bye, again, requires a pursing of the lips, and elites lack lips. Now, yes, it could be argued, well, what if all the Covenant members that we've met on the battlefield have just learned English? Well, it's kind of unreasonable to expect that every single soldier in an army will learn the language of their enemies, simply to taunt them on the battlefield. But what is reasonable to expect is that some very high-ranking members or members that are very prominent in specific circumstances may learn the language for a tactical edge or to increase in their battlefield awareness. But for the rest of them to effectively just speak their own native language, and for the individual on the opposing side to simply have translation software to do the rest, that's much more reasonable and much more believable, and ultimately leads to the final conclusion. With the exception of some very prominent members of the Covenant species, such as the Arbiter, Atriox, Escharum, Jaeger, Julum Dama and the like, and with the exception of Halo Reach and Halo CE, which happened before Cortana made her translation softwares for the UNSC, and finally the exception of Halo 4, where they speak a completely different dialect that hadn't been translated yet, every other game and every other scenario that you've come across Covenant species speaking in English have in fact been speaking their own language, and your armor's translation software has been translating it to English for your benefit. Oh, and a final point of note, in situations where it's just been Covenant species talking to each other with no humans nearby, the fact that you can understand the conversation going on is kind of leaning on the idea that you're a member of the Covenant listening to the conversation, and as such, you know, you'll understand what they're saying because you speak their language. That's kind of what we're driving at there. Okay, I admit that's probably a little point where the theory falls apart a little bit, but nevertheless, what are your thoughts on this perspective? Has this added anything to the gaming experience for you? Has it taken away anything for the gaming experience for you? Are you just neutral and kind of just accept it at face value? I'd like to know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. And until next time. Thanks for watching, commenting, liking and subscribing. I just want to give a quick shout out to my patrons and YouTube members: Spartan10148, my Metarch, Dylan, Falcon X003, Kenwood, Irrefutable Justice, Leon, Neek and Ramiz, my monitors, Alvin, Andrew, Brand, Brian, Cameron, Chris, Darian, Devon, Flaming Halo, Greenblood, Kyle, Legions Lost, Michael, Prophet Bear, Spartan and Wolf, my sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, my diligent enforcers, and all the other awesome people that have jumped aboard to support the channel over at Patreon. Another shout out to Todd Morrison, my transcendent YouTube member, and just one quick reminder to support us on all major social media channels including Discord. Much love from 00. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.